In the far reaches of the galaxy, humanity had always fought to survive, to thrive, and to find its place among the stars. The Alliance fleet, a collection of humanity's greatest military forces, had long worked to maintain peace. They had faced warlords, pirates, and countless threats, but nothing could prepare them for what was about to happen. Captain Jack Rutherford was not a man known for making big decisions. He wasn't a leader by nature, just a regular officer doing his job aboard the Exodus, a ship dedicated to peacekeeping missions. His job was simple: deliver messages, help where needed, and avoid conflict. But that all changed on a routine diplomatic mission to a distant station, a place where peace was supposed to be secured. The mission was to meet with a powerful warlord of the Tarkor, a race that, until then, humanity had avoided. The Tarkor were known throughout the galaxy as fierce and merciless warriors. Their strength was unmatched and their brutality was legendary. They were not a species that entertained negotiations. They simply conquered, taking what they wanted with little care for who stood in their way. Jack's mission was straightforward. He was to sit down with the Tarkor warlord and offer an alliance, a mutual agreement that would benefit both the Tarkor and humanity. At least that's what he thought. But what happened next was something Jack had never expected. The Tarkor warlord Korath was a massive creature, his body rippling with muscle and his eyes glowing with a fierce intelligence. When Jack entered the warlord's chambers, he was immediately struck by the difference in size and power between them. It was like standing in the presence of a natural disaster. Korath greeted him with a calm, calculating stare. "Human," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You come here with promises. I have heard them before. What makes you think your words will sway me?" Jack tried to stay calm. He knew he had to be careful. Everything was riding on this moment. The Tarkor were unpredictable, and a single misstep could lead to disaster. "We come with an offer of peace," Jack said. "An alliance between our species could bring great prosperity to both sides. We have technology, knowledge, and resources to share." The Tarkor warlord simply stared at him. The air between them grew thick with tension, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. But then, Korath spoke. "Again. Prosperity?" Korath's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You believe the Tarkor need your technology to survive?" Jack blinked, unsure of what the warlord meant. "Well, no, but you have no idea who you are dealing with, human," Korath interrupted, his voice booming. "We are the deadliest species in the galaxy. You have declared war with your words." Jack's mind raced. "What? No, that's not what I meant. I was only—" "Silence!" Korath roared. "You have declared war by offering your peace. You insult me with your feeble attempts." Jack froze, realizing too late that his attempt to offer peace had backfired in the most disastrous way possible. The Tarkor had a code of honor that demanded respect, and Jack's words, however innocent they seemed, had come across as a challenge to their strength. Before Jack could respond, Korath turned away and barked orders to his guards. "Prepare the fleet," he growled. "This human has declared war on the Tarkor. Let the galaxy feel our wrath." Panic surged through Jack's chest. He had not meant to start a war. He had only come to negotiate, to avoid conflict. But his words had been misinterpreted. The Tarkor's pride was vast, and their reaction was swift and violent. Jack's mind spun as he was quickly escorted out of the chamber by the Tarkor guards. The doors slammed shut behind him, and he felt the weight of the mistake settle on his shoulders like an unbearable burden. Back aboard the Exodus, Jack couldn't believe what had just happened. He was sure that this was a misunderstanding, that the Tarkor would eventually calm down and realize it was just a mistake. But as the ship's communications officer reported a message from the Tarkor warlord, the reality began to set in. "We are under attack," the officer said grimly. "The Tarkor fleet is on the move." Jack's heart sank. "What do you mean? We're still in diplomatic talks. They can't be launching an attack." But the screen in front of him showed the terrifying truth. A Tarkor fleet, massive and menacing, was heading straight for the outer colonies of humanity. The Tarkor, despite their promises of peace, had already launched an invasion. The fleet's leader, Admiral Shane Taylor, entered the bridge. His eyes were filled with disbelief. "Did you do this, Captain?" he asked, his voice cold. "I didn't mean to," Jack replied, his voice shaky. "I went to negotiate peace and I accidentally insulted them. Now they think we've declared war." Taylor's face darkened. "This is a disaster. We've never faced a species like the Tarkor. They don't negotiate, they don't compromise. If they think we're an enemy, they'll wipe us out without hesitation." Jack's chest tightened. The enormity of the situation hit him all at once. He had never asked for this. He never wanted to be the one to lead humanity into war. But now there was no turning back. The Tarkor had already taken the first step. Humanity's response would define its future. As the Exodus prepared to flee to a more secure position, Jack looked out at the stars, realizing that his life would never be the same again. He had no idea how he was going to stop this war, but he knew one thing for certain. Humanity's survival depended on his next move. The days that followed Captain Jack Rutherford's diplomatic mistake were filled with confusion and fear. The Tarkor did not waste time. They were known for their speed and aggression, and soon humanity found itself on the edge of annihilation. Back aboard the Exodus, Jack sat in his command chair, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy displayed before him. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one stood out above all others. How could he fix this? The Tarkor were no ordinary enemy. They were fierce, brutal, and their warships were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. On the screen in front of him, reports of Tarkor attacks flooded in. Colonies in the Outer Rim were already being decimated. There was no warning, no negotiation, just sudden and absolute destruction. Entire cities were wiped from existence in the blink of an eye. Humanity's outer colonies, many of which had only recently been established, were defenseless against the Tarkor onslaught. The Tarkor ships were massive, their sleek, dark hulls gleaming as they moved through space with terrifying precision. Their weapons were powerful, capable of tearing through the strongest human defenses. The sheer size of their fleet was overwhelming. Humanity's military was nowhere near prepared to fight them. And yet, Jack knew one thing for sure. There was no way out. The Tarkor weren't just going to stop, they would keep coming until there was nothing left. Captain Rutherford, the voice of Admiral Shane Taylor, broke through Jack's thoughts. "We're getting reports from the fleet. The Tarkor are targeting Earth's colonies on the edge of our system. We need to make a decision." Jack stood up, his mind working furiously. He was an officer, not a military strategist. But now, he had to think like one. His mistake had thrown humanity into the fire, and it was up to him to pull them out. "What do we know about their tactics?" Jack asked. Admiral Taylor's face was grave. "They don't seem to care about negotiations. It's all about domination. They strike hard and fast, they don't leave survivors, and they're relentless." Jack clenched his fists, a fire of determination sparking inside him. "Then we fight. We don't have a choice." Taylor raised an eyebrow. "Fight? Captain, they'll tear us apart. Our ships can't hold up against theirs. You've seen the reports. The Tarkor are wiping out entire fleets with a single strike." Jack knew the situation was dire. The Tarkor didn't just destroy, they obliterated. Their fleets were like swarms of locusts, and once they hit a target, there was no coming back from it. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Jack felt something stir inside him, something human, hope. It was the one thing the Tarkor couldn't take from them. "We might not win by brute force," Jack said, "but we can outsmart them. If we know how they fight, we can find a way to fight back." Taylor seemed skeptical, but Jack could see that he was willing to listen. The Exodus wasn't a battleship. It wasn't designed for all-out war. But Jack had faith in his crew. They might be outmatched, but they weren't out of options. "Not yet. I'll need every piece of intel we can get on the Tarkor," Jack continued. "I want to know their weaknesses, every single one, and I need you to get me a direct line to the other colonies. I don't care if they're under attack or not. I want all of humanity to know what's coming." Taylor nodded and left to carry out the orders. Jack stood alone in the command center, looking out at the vast emptiness of space. The Tarkor were coming and they would stop at nothing until humanity was nothing more than a memory. Meanwhile, far from the Exodus, the Tarkor fleet advanced through the stars. Their ships, massive and terrifying, tore through space with an efficiency that sent chills down the spine of anyone who encountered them. These were not mere conquerors. They were predators, and their prey was the galaxy. On the flagship of the Tarkor fleet, Warlord Korath stood on the bridge, his massive frame towering over the crew. His sharp golden eyes gleamed with cold malice as he watched the chaos unfold across the galaxy. The human captain's words had been the spark he needed. Now the Tarkor were once again on the warpath, and there would be no mercy. "Warlord," a Tarkor officer spoke, bowing low. "We've received word from our scouts. The humans are preparing a defense. It seems they've learned of our tactics." Korath grinned, showing his sharp teeth. "Let them prepare. It will not matter. The humans are weak. They have no understanding of true strength. We will crush them, as we have crushed so many before." The officer hesitated before speaking again. "But Tun, there is something strange, my lord. The humans, they are not as we expected. They are fighting back. There is resistance." Korath narrowed his eyes. "Resistance? Impossible." The officer continued. "They've begun forming alliances with other species. They are gathering forces, preparing for a counterattack. It is unclear how they will strike, but they are not as easily broken as we thought." The warlord's expression darkened. "So they refuse to submit. No matter. They will learn the price of defying the Tarkor." Korath's orders were clear. Destroy any resistance before it could spread. The Tarkor fleet would sweep through the human colonies, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. Every world that resisted would be annihilated. And yet, even as he spoke, a nagging feeling of doubt crept into his mind. What if the humans were more than just weak? Back aboard the Exodus, Jack continued to gather intel and prepare his strategy. Hours later, Admiral Taylor returned with troubling news. "Captain," he said, his voice grim, "the Tarkor are targeting the third colony on our list. If they continue at this pace, Earth could be next." Jack nodded, his mind racing. The Tarkor were making their move, and humanity had little time left. He needed to act quickly, or there wouldn't be an Earth left to defend. The fleet would need to hit the Tarkor hard and fast, and he had to rely on everything they had learned so far. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give humanity a fighting chance. "Prepare the fleet," Jack ordered, his voice filled with determination. "We fight for survival. We fight for our future." The battle for the galaxy had begun. The galaxy was changing. What had once been a peaceful, prosperous time for humanity had now turned into a struggle for survival. The Tarkor were relentless, their warships tearing through space with terrifying speed, and their attacks were unstoppable. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, humanity was not ready to give up. Captain Jack Rutherford stood in the command center of the Exodus, staring at the holographic display of the galaxy. The Tarkor fleet was still closing in, but humanity had begun to fight back. Slowly, they were finding their way. Each day brought new surprises, and Jack was beginning to see the glimmer of hope that had been missing at the start of the war. "We've gathered new intel on Tarkor movements," Admiral Shane Taylor reported as he entered the room. "We've noticed something strange. They seem to be following a predictable pattern, attacking the outer colonies first and then moving inward towards Earth. We can use that." Jack nodded, absorbing the information. "So they're not completely unpredictable?" "No," Taylor agreed. "It seems that they rely heavily on their strength and speed, but they don't expect resistance. They've always dominated, so they've never had to think beyond their immediate power. If we can strike before they reach Earth, we might stand a chance." Jack's heart raced. It was a small hope, but it was a hope. "What do we know about their weaknesses? We need to hit them where it hurts." "We've been analyzing their technology," Taylor explained. "They're powerful, but their ships are not invincible. Their weapons are strong, but their defenses are focused on brute force. We think we can exploit that." Jack's mind worked quickly. They couldn't match the Tarkor's firepower, but they didn't need to. They needed to outsmart them. Humanity had always been good at that. Innovation, strategy, and persistence were their strengths. It was time to put them to the test. "All right," Jack said. "We'll need to gather a team, a small elite force. We'll infiltrate a Tarkor ship and plant a virus into their system, something that will disable their communications and throw them into chaos. Without their ability to coordinate, we'll have a better chance of striking back." Taylor looked unsure, but Jack's determination was clear. "We don't have much time," Jack said. "If we don't act fast, Earth will be their next target." The plan was risky, but Jack knew it was the only option they had. With Earth's fate on the line, the Exodus and its fleet of smaller ships began to move toward the Tarkor's next target, a heavily fortified Tarkor station near the border of the human colonies. The Tarkor had always kept their most vital assets protected, but Jack's crew had found a weak spot. There was a narrow window of opportunity to infiltrate, and it was their only chance. As the Exodus and its allies moved into position, Jack gathered his team. He picked a mix of experts, soldiers, engineers, and hackers, each with a crucial skill needed for the mission. His trusted lieutenant, Mira Calhoun, would lead the assault on the Tarkor station. She was known for her courage and quick thinking, and Jack knew she would be able to handle whatever the Tarkor threw at her. "We're going to need to move fast," Mira said, adjusting her gear. "Once we're on the station, we'll have little time before the Tarkor realize what we're doing. If we don't get that virus into their system quickly, everything we're doing here will be for nothing." "I know," Jack said. "I'll be right behind you, Mira. Just make sure the team stays sharp, no mistakes." The mission began under the cover of darkness, with the Exodus and its fleet launching a coordinated distraction at the Tarkor station. The Tarkor ships were drawn away, leaving the station vulnerable. Mira and her team, aboard a stealth shuttle, slipped into the station's atmosphere without detection. As they made their way through the station's corridors, their weapons ready, the team stayed quiet. The Tarkor were powerful, but they were not invincible. The team's goal was simple: get to the control room, plant the virus, and get out before the Tarkor could retaliate. But as they advanced deeper into the station, things began to go wrong. The Tarkor were smarter than they had anticipated. Security patrols moved in unexpected directions, and Mira's team had to fight their way through. The Tarkor were ruthless, but the humans were faster, their quick movements and superior tactics giving them the upper hand. "Keep moving," Mira shouted as she led the team down a narrow hallway. "We're almost there." Jack, watching from the Exodus, felt the tension rise. Every move they made could be their last. He couldn't afford to lose them. He couldn't afford to fail. Humanity now. Mira and her team reached the control room where the virus would be planted. The room was massive, with walls lined with advanced Tarkor technology. Mira's team worked quickly, planting the virus into the system's core. "Virus is in," one of her team members reported. "We're ready to go." But just as they were about to leave, an alarm blared across the station. The Tarkor had found them. "Time's up," Mira said. "Get to the shuttle now." The team ran, guns raised as they fought their way back toward the exit. The Tarkor were closing in, and their firepower was overwhelming. The humans fought back with everything they had, using their knowledge of the station to their advantage. "Almost there," Mira yelled. "Just a little further." They reached the shuttle, and as the door closed behind them, the Exodus launched a full assault on the station, helping to cover their escape. The Tarkor were thrown into chaos as their communication system was disabled by the virus. For the first time in days, Jack felt a spark of hope. The mission had been a success. As the Exodus and its fleet retreated to safety, the Tarkor were left in disarray. Their ability to communicate with their forces was crippled, and their fleet was no longer as coordinated as before. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step forward. The humans had struck a blow at the heart of the Tarkor war machine. Jack stood on the bridge watching as the fleet moved into a safe zone. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the Tarkor had attacked, humanity had the upper hand. "We've got them on the ropes," Jack said quietly to himself. "Now we finish this." The victory over the Tarkor communication network was a significant win for humanity. But Jack knew it was only the beginning. They had taken a small step forward, but the battle was far from over. The Tarkor were still out there, still a threat, and their power was far greater than any human force could handle on its own. Captain Jack Rutherford stood in the command center of the Exodus, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. The Tarkor were still moving toward Earth, and while their communication was disrupted, the fleet was still intact. They were just as deadly as ever. Jack needed a way to turn the tide in humanity's favor. He turned to Admiral Taylor, who was monitoring the fleet's movements. "What's the latest?" Taylor looked up from the display. "We've bought ourselves some time, but the Tarkor are not going to sit idle. They'll regroup and come at us harder than before. The virus may have crippled their communications, but they're still strong. They're unpredictable, Jack." Jack nodded, his mind racing. "So, what's our next move? We need to hit them hard, before they can organize again." Admiral Taylor hesitated. "There's something we didn't know before. We've been investigating the Tarkor's origins, and it's not what we expected." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Taylor looked uncomfortable as he activated a new holographic display, showing images of the Tarkor's homeworld. "It's not just the Tarkor who are dangerous. There's something else. An ancient race, known as the Blight, has been influencing them for centuries. The Tarkor are under their control in a way. The Blight have been manipulating the Tarkor's culture, turning them into the ruthless warriors they are today." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The Tarkor weren't just a powerful species, they were a weapon controlled by something even darker. "So, we're fighting two enemies now? The Tarkor and the Blight?" Taylor nodded grimly. "Yes. And the Blight aren't just a small faction. They're a whole race of ancient beings far more powerful than the Tarkor. The Tarkor were just the Blight's tool for domination. If we want to defeat the Tarkor, we need to get to the heart of the Blight's influence." Jack rubbed his chin. This was worse than he thought. He had underestimated the true threat. But now, the path ahead was clear. If they were going to stop the Tarkor, they had to take down the Blight first. "We need to find their base, their central node, and destroy it," Jack said, his voice firm. "If we cut off the Blight's control over the Tarkor, the war could be over," Taylor agreed. "We've been tracking a strange energy signature coming from a distant part of the galaxy. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before. It might be the Blight's base." "Then that's where we go," Jack said. "Get the fleet ready. We're taking the fight to the heart of the Blight." The Exodus and its fleet of smaller ships began their journey into the unknown. They had no idea what they would find, but they knew it was the only chance they had. The Tarkor were on the move, and humanity couldn't afford to waste any more time. They had to strike before the Blight's control over the Tarkor became unbreakable. The journey took them through uncharted space, to a region of the galaxy few had ever explored. The stars were distant, their light weak, and the darkness seemed to grow thicker the further they traveled. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as they moved deeper into this unknown territory. Captain Mira Calhoun, his trusted lieutenant, spoke up from across the command center. "We've detected a massive energy reading. It's not far from here. Could this be it?" Jack looked at the readings, his eyes narrowing. "It has to be. Prepare the fleet for an assault. We're going in." As they approached the source of the energy, a massive structure came into view. It was unlike any space station or structure they had ever encountered. The design was otherworldly, twisted, dark, and pulsing with energy. The entire structure seemed to vibrate with power, and Jack could feel the weight of its presence pressing against his chest. "That's the heart of the Blight's influence," Jack said quietly, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We destroy that. We destroy the Blight's control over the Tarkor." The Exodus and its fleet positioned themselves just outside the structure, ready for battle. But as they prepared to launch their assault, something unexpected happened. The structure seemed to come alive, its surface shifting and changing, like it was reacting to the presence of the human ships. "Something's wrong," Mira said, her voice tense. "This isn't just a space station. It's alive, or it's been designed to look like it." Before Jack could respond, the entire fleet was rocked by a massive shockwave. The Blight's station sent out an energy pulse that knocked out all communications and crippled the ship's navigation systems. The Tar Corps, who had been waiting in the wings for the attack, saw their chance. They had arrived in full force, their ships pouring out of the dark space like a swarm of locusts. The Exodus shuddered as it was hit by another blast. "We've got incoming Tar Corps ships," Taylor shouted. "They're coming in fast." Jack's mind raced. The Tar Corps were here, and the Blight station was more powerful than they could have ever imagined. They had to act fast. "Mira, get a team to board that station," Jack ordered. "We need to find the central control node and destroy it. Now." Mira nodded. "On it, Captain." The battle raged as the Exodus and its fleet fought against the Tar Corps forces, trying to hold them back long enough for Mira and her team to board the Blight station. The Tar Corps ships were relentless, but the humans fought with everything they had. It was a battle unlike any other, and it was clear that the outcome would shape the future of the galaxy. As Mira's team boarded the Blight station, they were greeted by a terrifying sight. The station was alive, filled with strange alien technology that seemed to pulse with dark energy. It was clear that the Blight had mastered technology far beyond anything the humans had ever seen. The team moved quickly, knowing that time was running out. Mira and her team fought through the dark corridors, facing strange biomechanical creatures that seemed to guard the heart of the station. They were close, but the closer they got, the more dangerous the station became. The Blight didn't want to let them succeed. "Keep moving," Mira shouted. "We're almost there." The fate of humanity and the galaxy was hanging in the balance. The clock was ticking, and Jack knew that this was their only chance to stop the Tar Corps and the Blight. It was a mission that could change everything, but only if they succeeded. Mira's team fought their way through the dark, twisted corridors of the Blight station, their weapons drawn and their senses on high alert. The station pulsed with strange energy, and every step they took seemed to make the walls vibrate with life. It was a living, breathing structure far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. The air felt thick with danger, and every corner seemed to hide new threats. Mira, leading the charge, could feel the weight of the mission pressing on her. The fate of humanity, and the Tar Corps, rested on their ability to destroy the central control node deep within the heart of the station. If they failed, the Blight would continue to control the Tar Corps, and the war would become a losing battle for all of humanity. "Move quickly," Mira shouted, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We don't have much time before the Tar Corps figure out what we're doing." The team moved as one, staying close and watching each other's backs. The station seemed to be fighting them at every turn, with strange biomechanical creatures appearing from the shadows, their limbs snapping and twisting as they charged. The creatures were fast, powerful, and relentless. But Mira and her team were ready. They had no choice. "Take them down," Mira ordered as the first creature lunged at one of her soldiers. The team fired in unison, their weapons cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. The creature crumpled to the floor, but more were coming. Mira motioned for the team to keep moving. They couldn't afford to stop. Back aboard the Exodus, Jack stood on the bridge, his eyes glued to the holographic display of the Blight station. The Tar Corps had regrouped, their fleet now surrounding the station like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. The battle raged outside, and the Exodus was doing its best to hold off the Tar Corps. But Jack knew that the real fight was inside the station. "Mira's team is close," Jack said to Admiral Taylor, his voice tight with tension. "We need to keep the Tar Corps distracted. If they realize what we're doing inside, they'll stop at nothing to destroy them." "We'll do our best, Captain," Taylor replied, his eyes focused on the tactical screen. "But we're outnumbered, and the Tar Corps aren't pulling back. If we don't hold them off, the Exodus will be sitting in their sights." Jack nodded grimly. "Do whatever it takes. We've got one shot at this." Mira and her team pushed forward, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the station. They had fought off several waves of Blight's creations, but the deeper they went, the more difficult it became. The station seemed to shift around them, its walls and floors changing as if it were alive, trying to trap them. "We're almost there," Mira said, her voice filled with determination. "Keep your eyes open. The control node should be just ahead." The team rounded a corner and there it was, the central control room. The door was massive, made of strange dark metal that seemed to hum with energy. Mira stepped forward, her hand resting on the door panel. The door opened with a low groan, revealing the control node. It was a massive structure towering over them, pulsing with dark energy. It looked like a living organism, its surface covered in twisting vines of glowing energy. "This is it," Mira said, her voice steady. "Let's get to work." One of her team members, Corporal Isaac, moved to the control panel. He was a tech expert and he had the delicate job of planting the virus that would sever the Blight's connection to the Tarkor. He worked quickly, his fingers flying over the control panel. But just as he was about to complete the task, the room shuddered. The Blight station seemed to come alive, and Mira felt the air grow heavier. "Something's wrong," Isaac muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "The station's fighting back." Mira's instincts kicked in. "We've got to finish this now." She looked around the room, her eyes scanning for any threat. "Everyone, cover Isaac, we don't have long." The station's walls began to shift, opening up to reveal more of the biomechanical creatures. They were larger now, more vicious, and their eyes glowed with an unnatural light. They charged, their claws clicking against the metal floor. "Fire!" Mira shouted, raising her weapon. The team opened fire, but the creatures were coming too, fast. The control room was a small enclosed space and the team was at a disadvantage. Isaac was still working at the control panel, but the creatures were closing in. Mira knew they had to finish what they started or they would never make it out alive. "We're almost there," Isaac called out. "Just a few more seconds." Mira gritted her teeth. She fired at the advancing creatures, her shots landing with precision. But there were too many of them. The team was starting to run out of ammo, and the creatures kept coming. Just then, the door to the control room exploded open and a massive creature, larger than the others, stepped inside. It was the Blight's leader, a massive, terrifying figure that seemed to pulse with dark energy. Its body was a twisted mass of metal and flesh, its eyes glowing with pure malice. The creature towered over Mira and her team, its claws reaching for them. "Get back," Mira shouted, pushing her team to the far side of the room. "Isaac, finish it." Isaac was shaking, but he didn't hesitate. He pressed a final key on the control panel, and the station shuddered. The control node flared with light, and the massive creature screeched as the virus took effect. The energy surrounding the creature faltered, and it staggered backward, falling to the ground with a deafening crash. "We did it," Isaac shouted, relief flooding his voice. The station's pulse began to slow, the dark energy flickering as the Blight's control over the Tarkor weakened. The creature on the floor writhed, but its power was fading fast. Mira looked around at her team, their faces filled with exhaustion and relief. "Let's get out of here. Now." Back on the Exodus, Jack watched as the Blight station began to crumble. The Tarkor fleet, once so organized and powerful, now appeared confused and disoriented. The virus had done its job. The Blight's control over the Tarkor was broken. "Prepare to retreat," Jack ordered. "We've won today, but the fight isn't over. We need to take advantage of this." The Tarkor were still a threat, but humanity had dealt them a serious blow. The galaxy was no longer just a place of fear. It was a place where humanity could stand tall and fight back. Jack looked at the fading image of the Blight station, now reduced to rubble. "We've broken the chains that held the Tarkor. Now we show them what humanity is capable of." The Blight station was nothing but debris now. The massive structure that had once held the key to the Tarkor's terrifying power was reduced to smoldering fragments floating through space. The Tarkor fleet, once so coordinated and fearsome, was now in disarray. The virus had shattered their communication, and the influence of the Blight over their minds had been severed. It was the first real victory humanity had tasted in this war, and it felt like a breath of fresh air in a galaxy choked by fear. Captain Jack Rutherford stood on the bridge of the Exodus, his eyes fixed on the remains of the Blight station. His mind was still processing everything that had happened. The battle was far from over, but this victory had changed the course of the war. The Tarkor were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. They were wounded, disoriented, and vulnerable. "Captain, we've received a message from the Tarkor fleet," Admiral Taylor said, his voice grave. "They've sent a delegation. They want to negotiate." Jack raised an eyebrow. After all the destruction, after everything the Tarkor had done, they were asking to talk? It didn't make sense. But then again, nothing about this war had made sense. "Put it through," Jack said, his voice firm. He knew this was a pivotal moment. The Tarkor might be asking for peace, but Jack wasn't about to let them off the hook so easily. The holographic image of Warlord Korath appeared in front of him, his massive figure filling the screen. His eyes burned with cold fury, but there was something different about his expression now, something uncertain. "Human," Korath growled. "You have done what no one thought possible. You have broken the chains that bound us. But you have not won. Our warriors are still strong. We are still a force to be reckoned with." Jack met Korath's gaze, his voice unwavering. "You've lost your control. The Blight no longer commands you. Your fleet is in chaos. You're not the unstoppable force you once were." Korath snarled but said nothing for a long moment. "You think you have won? That the war is over? You are fools. Even without the Blight's control, we are warriors. We will not surrender." Jack stepped forward, his posture confident. "I didn't ask for this war, Korath. You did. You attacked our people, destroyed our colonies, and tried to wipe us out. Now it's your turn to answer for it. But if you want peace, you'll have to earn it. We won't just forget what you've done." Korath's expression darkened, but for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of hesitation in the warlord's eyes. "You want a price for peace?" Korath said, his voice low and dangerous. "What do you offer, human?" Jack thought for a moment. The Tarkor had been relentless, but they were still a powerful force. If humanity was going to survive, there had to be a way to end the fighting without complete destruction. The galaxy had already suffered too much. "We'll give you a chance," Jack said, his voice steady. "A chance to rebuild. But your aggression, your raids, your destruction, it has to stop. And you have to help us rebuild the damage you've caused. If you agree to these terms, we can start working toward peace." Korath stared at him, his eyes narrowing. "You would forgive us so easily?" "Forgiveness isn't easy," Jack replied. "But it's a start. And this is the last chance you'll get." For a long time, the two of them stared at each other, across the holographic projection. Finally, Korath spoke, his voice begrudging but clear. "We will agree to your terms. But know this, human. The Tarkor will never forget this fight. We will remember your strength, your courage. But we will also remember the insult you brought upon us. The war may be over, but the scars will remain." Jack nodded, understanding. The Tarkor were not a species that would forget easily, but for the first time in years, humanity had a real chance at peace. The war had taken its toll, but there was hope for the future. They could rebuild, but it would take time. The Exodus and the rest of humanity's fleet pulled back as the Tarkor ships retreated, their once formidable strength now reduced to a shadow of what it had been. The negotiations were not without their challenges, and Jack knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time since the Tarkor's invasion, humanity had the upper hand. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. The human race had not only survived, they had won. The Tarkor, despite their rage and their past cruelty, had agreed to peace. It was a turning point for humanity. The war had cost them dearly, but it had also shown them something extraordinary: the strength of the human spirit. Jack sat in his quarters aboard the Exodus, looking out at the stars. The war was over, but there was still much work to be done. Rebuilding would take time, and the Tarkor, despite their agreement, would still need to prove their commitment to peace. But Jack knew that humanity was stronger than ever. The fire that had driven them to survive had not been extinguished. It had only grown brighter. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: humanity would no longer be a species to fear. They had faced the galaxy's most deadly species and had come out on top. They had shown the universe what it meant to fight for survival, to fight for peace, and to never back down. As Jack stood up and turned to leave, a soft chime rang through the ship. A message from Admiral Taylor. "Captain?" Taylor's voice crackled through the comm. The Tarkor fleet is retreating. The peace talks have begun in earnest. We've won this war, but it's time to think about the future. We need to rebuild, together. Jack smiled. It was the start of something new. The war had ended, but humanity's place in the galaxy was just beginning.